And
Yes.
so, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here today. Um, Avik asked me to talk about a very big topic, Colorado River update, shaping the future of Arizona agriculture. And so I tried to be somewhat complete in talking about Arizona agriculture generally, and then Colorado River specifically. And so I have a lot of slides. So I'm going to go through some of them pretty quickly. Some of them are background. You'll see throughout that I have some QR codes and links, and my email address is there. And Avik is free to post this or share this as a PDF. So I'm just going to get going because there's a lot here. Um, all right, just I know many of the people online as I looked at the names of the people coming in, but there's several that I don't. So just a little background on the Water Resources Research Center, where I serve as director and have worked for quite a long time. I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Environmental Science. And the Water Resources Research Center bridges the academic and real world communities. And we do a lot that's really outward facing. So if you're not connected to us, please subscribe to our weekly waves. Check out our website. We have a lot of good information, and I'll talk about some of that as we go along. I want to know that we ourselves sponsor water webinars, and you can get notified of them if you subscribe to the weekly wave. And a lot of the work we do is in partnership with others. When it comes to agriculture, of course, agriculture is very important in the state of Arizona. It's a big water user. I'll have some figures later. We've had multiple conferences. We just completed our 2026 conference just about 4 weeks ago. We've had some specifically focused on water, and we have some specifically focused on agriculture, and we have some Arroyo publications that are free and available online with some good information, and including the 2023, where we had some fact sheets. So I really encourage those of you unfamiliar with our work and resources to take a look at our website. And here's just a quick overview of the many things we have offered there. So a lot of useful information. Now, a little bit about my work as a researcher, educator, extension faculty member. My kind of elevator speech is I work to help people understand the context for and complexity of our region's water situation or situations. And by region, it could be local, it could be statewide, it could be Colorado River Basin wide, it could be at the border with Mexico. Talking about the challenges, exploring solutions, and then underscoring the role of governance and policy in all of that. And I do work, as indicated, at multiple geographic scales. And I am a professor. I write these reflections essays that are short and geared for a more general audience than the typical academic publications. If anybody wants to look further, they can look up on the WRRC website, and they can find my CV that lists a lot more in terms of publications. And then I teach a class. I just finished teaching each spring a graduate class in water policy. It's called Water Policy in Arizona and Semi-Arid Regions. And this is a slide that I use in the first class, and I use it in many of my presentations. Those of you who may have heard me before have seen me use this because I do try to explain what's going on with water policy and management. And there's a lot of factors that determine what we see on the ground. And as you can see, I have a couple of red arrows there pointing to the importance of the legal institutional framework, including also who's making decisions at what level, are things centralized or decentralized, and then the importance of public values and politics, because the public values determine the kind of political values that we see in legislatures and the like. And it's their policy decisions that determine much of what we see on the ground. And the importance of context, water cycle context, of course, no new water is created, but I particularly like this graphic that's from our water map poster, which shows groundwater as not a pristine bathtub underground, but water that's interspersed with sand and gravel and materials. And that's important because we rely on groundwater quite a bit in Arizona. I'll show some numbers in just a moment. There's, of course, geographic and jurisdictional context. Many of you have seen a map, I'm sure, like this one on the left that shows the boundaries for the Colorado River Basin, 7 US states, 2 states in the Republic of Mexico, 30 tribal nations are part of the Colorado River Basin, 22 of them in Arizona. And the water from the Colorado River is transported outside the hydrologic boundaries of the basin into Los Angeles, Denver, Salt Lake City, parts of New Mexico. And this context is important because where you are and who you are determines how you look at things. And so the map on the right was prepared back for a Bureau of Reclamation 10 Tribes Partnership publication that showed things from the perspective of the tribal nations. And in many cases, they span US states, and it's a different perspective when you're looking at the decision-making policy framework. And then I like to talk about the wicked water problems context. Wicked water problems they're not simple, but they're simply defined as big problems that do not have simple pathways to resolving them. And 2 of them that I like to talk about, there are more than 2, but specifically for Arizona, are the imbalance of water supply and demand, and the Colorado River water in particular, and groundwater invisibility and overdraft. We can't see that groundwater, and it's in limited supply. And in many cases, we're using it at rates that are not measured, and we don't know how much was there in the first place. I'm going to say a little bit more about groundwater later, but this presentation will focus quite a bit more on Colorado River. And we have big problems. As I said, they're not simple solutions, and it really takes innovation and collaboration among all of us to address these and try to mitigate them. All right, so I'm going to show a couple of slides that come from material shared by Central Arizona Project, General Manager Brenda Berman, and then their Colorado River operations or management staff person, Vinitha Kartha, both in my class. They were guest speakers back on March 6th, and then also some later slides. So the situation with the Colorado River, which I'm sure pretty much everybody in the audience knows, is that we're dealing with reduced river flows. And so this chart shows what happened. And in fact, I'm going to do something that I learned to do. I'm going to make my pointer a laser pointer. So, this green line here shows the 120-year average of 14.6 million acre feet that the river, the average annual flows. Even this level is less than has been allocated. So we've had an over-allocated river for a long, long time. Then if you look at the 36-year average starting in the late 80s or so, you were down to 13 million acre feet on average. And then if you look even later, if you can see my pointer, starting around the turn of the century, the early 2000s, you're down to 12.3 million acre feet on average. And then if you look even more recently, and I'll show a slide in a moment, it's looking even worse on a yearly basis. So the river's producing less. There's no less demand. If anything, there's more demand. And so we have an imbalance. And we've only had a few particularly wet years in the last several years. Okay, so this is a slide that was presented to the CAP board just last Thursday. I used to serve on that board for 12 years from 2009 through 2020, representing Pinal County. But at each meeting, Vinitha Kartha presents an overview of Colorado River conditions. And so this is a slide from her presentation. And if you look again at the years, they're down there. 2025 is the last blue year where my laser pointer is. And then these are what the different models show as most probable is the black one. And you can see how low that is. It's really, really low. And so And as she notes, the May 5th mid-month update, and these updates come through the Bureau of Reclamation, is already 600,000 acre feet less than the last forecast. So it's been a bad winter, and the news isn't getting any better. Okay. And then this, going back, was a slide General Manager Brenda Berman showed to my class in March. These teacup figures are something people have seen regularly. They show the storage in the different storage reservoirs in the Colorado River system, with Lake Mead being the largest surface reservoir in the United States. Lake Powell, I believe, the second largest. And you can see that as of early March, late February, Lake Mead was about 34% full. Lake Powell was 26% full. Some of these smaller reservoirs were more full, but you can see by the size of the cup, they're much, much smaller than the big reservoirs. And what people want people to understand is that it's more than just precipitation that's determining the annual flows in the river. It's also the runoff that results from that snowpack. And what's striking over the last 5-6 years is the fall off between snowpack as a percentage of average versus runoff. So sometimes we can have, like in 2020, kind of an average year on snowpack, but the runoff is only 60%. Look at 2021. You can take a look at those numbers. 2023 was a really good winter. There was still a fall off, but not as bad, let's say, as the other. And what's the cause of that? Earlier heating, temperatures rising earlier in the spring, soils drier. It's taking more moisture to kind of just wet the soils before the water can get in the river. And I've seen some projected numbers for 2026, and they're just looking very bad. And in fact, in going back to the May 7th, last week's CAP board meeting, you can see already there's been a fall off from the percentages that were there in March. 31% storage in Lake Mead and 24% in Lake Powell. So we've got a really, really sick system, unfortunately. All right, and then again, just wanting to give you the kind of bad news, about the Colorado River at this winter and this spring is just where we're looking at for shortage conditions. And this definitely affects water for agriculture. And that is, if we're below 1075, but above 1050, we're in a tier 1 shortage. And so if you look at these different lines, it's a little busy. Minimum probable is the gold. The most probable is the blue. And you see that since, if this is only starting in December. So this is going through, here we are, May 2026. If you can see my laser pointer, we're right around that 1050 level. It goes a little below according to the projections, then goes up under assumptions about the modeling, so that it looks like at the end of the year, in all cases, we're going to be above that 1050, which means we're in a tier 1 shortage. But then if you go out beyond into 2027, those lines really, really go down. And so this is what's so concerning, is that, yeah, we've got some storage. We've got some ability. The Bureau of Reclamation announced last month to release some waters from those smaller storage reservoirs into Lake Powell, where there's concern about getting below the level for which hydropower can be generated, but then also reducing the releases to Lake Mead. And so the whole system is in a challenging state. There's not a lot of extra water to move around. And if we continue to have winters like we did this winter, it's going to be challenging and concerning. Okay, so let's get to Arizona water and where we stand with that in agriculture. So I'm sure many of you have seen these figures from the Department of Water Resources. I noted that they're all from 2020. And so it'll be interesting to see what some updates are, because in 2020, we were just starting to go into the official shortage conditions in the Colorado River. But if you look at the supply, where is Arizona's water supply coming from? Over a third from the Colorado River, both on river and then delivered through the Central Arizona Project to Central Arizona. We got 18% from in-state rivers, such as the Salt River Project watershed. We got reclaimed water at 5% of the total, but groundwater at 41. So groundwater is a really important water source for Arizona on average. And then if you look at the uses, agriculture's the big user. Municipal use is growing some, but not as rapidly as population has grown. But here we are today to talk about agriculture and Colorado River. Okay, so we don't have the time to go into an explanation of Arizona's groundwater management, but I will say and remind everybody, groundwater is managed actively in what are called the active management areas, those goldish colored areas on the map on the left. And we also have what are called irrigation non-expansion areas. So in both of those areas, agriculture's footprint could not expand beyond what was irrigated in the 5 years before the formation of the AMA or INA. And the active management areas kind of in the central part of the state through up to Prescott, those were all established, basically established in the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, although until 1994, the Santa Cruz AMA down here at the border was part of the Tucson AMA. All right, but we've got a changing landscape here. I prepared this slide for my class when we met in January, and it's just things have been changing, and we're having trouble keeping up with our maps at the Water Resources Research Center because things are changing. There has been a Douglas Active Management Area form where there had been an INA. There's a Wilcox AMA that was formed recently. If you go all the way to the right, that shows 2026, you got the Renegras Plain. And then I have a question mark over the Hualapai Valley INA that was created a few years ago because a court decision in January 2026 found that the Department of Water Resources had, according to the finding of the judge, not followed appropriate processes for establishing an INA. I believe that's under appeal or will be appealed and so forth. So there's been a changing landscape. And as I already mentioned, agriculture cannot expand its footprint in AMAs or INAs. So the more the map is getting colored, the more there are changes to the ability of lands to be irrigated, particularly expansion of those. Okay. But one of the things that I'd like to point out, and is important to point out, is that those figures that I showed you earlier for the sources of water, those are average for the state. And once you kind of delve into the different regions of the state, you see situations vary quite a bit across the regions. And particularly when talking about agriculture, this is our water map poster, and this is one that we haven't yet updated to include the new INAs and AMAs and the changes and all that. But if you look at this map and you look at the green areas, those are agricultural areas. And so I talk often about you have differences in situations across different parts of the state, and within sectors, you have quite a bit of variation. And if you take a look at some of the side bars of our water map poster, this one on the right shows the land ownership in the state, and the green is tribal lands, the kind of salmony, whatever color that is, shows federal lands, blues are state and some local lands, and only the white are the privately owned lands. And so a lot of our lands are not privately held, and the rules for water use and water rights establishment and so forth may differ quite a bit depending upon where you are, what lands these are. And then the graphic on the left shows, these are numbers from about 2016, shows the areas like Yuma that are heavily reliant on surface water, and then the teal areas are heavily reliant on groundwater, and the other ones are more of a mix. The point being, water resource situations vary a lot across Arizona. All right, so let me just talk a little bit about the Colorado River and agriculture. And again, some of this, many of you will be familiar with, but I'll just go into it a little bit, because in the end, because of how challenged the hydrology is on the Colorado River, even an area like Yuma that has senior water rights to Colorado River water could be impacted perhaps more voluntarily than Central Arizona agriculture, but there may be a look to them to reduce their water usage over time through compensated reductions and so forth. And so I think most everybody will know that this area produces a high percentage of the leafy greens that are consumed in the US and Canada in the winter months. So senior water rights on the river, high value crops being produced, that's Yuma. If you go a little bit north of there, you've got the Colorado River Indian tribes, and obviously a sovereign tribal nation. Their lands actually span the Colorado River. They have some lands on the California side. They have very senior rights to a lot of Colorado River water. Some of you may know that they declared personhood, the Council for the Colorado River, not that long ago. They tend to grow a different mix of crops than those you see down in Yuma. They're not growing the leafy green vegetables that we see down there. They don't have the vertically integrated, coolers and so forth. So it's a different crop mix there. They've been involved in efforts to conserve water to Leven Lake Mead. They recently got legislation that allows them to lease their water, where historically they had not been able to do that. And then if we go, and I'm going to come to Central Arizona last, if we go to Cochise County, that's an area that's largely reliant on groundwater, which is in limited supply. We have two new active managements there, the Douglas active management area, and then the Wilcox. And there are big questions there about what will be the management goal, what kind of reductions in groundwater will be used there. And in general, there's just been a big question about how could we tailor some of the groundwater regulations to the local conditions? And I'll point out later, we haven't quite been able to agree on that. And so now let's get to Central Arizona, where Avik works, and most of us in the state live, meaning the Sun Corridor from the border up through North Phoenix. And historically, there was a reliance on groundwater, in particularly in the Pinal County area. And up, of course, in Phoenix, historically, there was a reliance in some areas on Salt River Project water, but much of that area has become urbanized. And Colorado River water became an important source in the late 80s in the central Phoenix area, and then in the early 90s, as the canal water made its way further uphill from Phoenix to Tucson. But now very little Colorado River water is available to Central Arizona ag, and I'll show you a chart showing that, because of the way the priority within the Central Arizona project system. And so we have priorities within the Colorado River system. the Central Arizona project is low priority because that's what it had to agree with in order to get authorization to build it in 1968. And then within the CAP system, the Central Arizona project system, there are different priorities. And so because of the shortages that we've had since the turn of this decade, very little Colorado River water is now available to Central Arizona agriculture. There is some, but much less than there had been if you go back 10 and 15 years. There's a return to groundwater, but those supplies are finite, and a lot of the land is actually owned for future development, including houses, but also industrial uses as well. You got a lot of alfalfa and cotton. But here's a graph that I think many of you may have seen. It's interesting. It's not shown quite as much because we're dealing with now we're in the current situation where we're in the tier 1 and maybe tier 2. And so looking at what was going to be according to the 2007 guidelines is here on the left was, this is the block chart showing the priorities of Colorado River water delivered through the Central Arizona project, with the most secure, highest priority at the bottom. So the bottom is priority 3 or P3. Most of the Colorado River water delivered through the Central Arizona project is P4 water. Within that category, the next grouping is the M&I, municipal and industrial priority, and Indian priority. Then there's this non-Indian agriculture, which that water, a lot of it's held by Gila River Indian community, Phoenix, some other cities. And then there was this ag pool, which, by the way, was expected to go away in 2030. And what has happened, though, is there's been a tremendous acceleration of reductions in supplies provided to agriculture by the Central Arizona project because of getting into the shortage conditions. So 2007, there were guidelines adopted by the Secretary of the Interior to share shortage. There was tier 1, 2, and 3 based on those numbers, or the elevation above sea level of Lake Mead. And what happened was, though, and they thought that they would be good for 20 years. We'll adopt it for 20 years, and then we'll worry about what to do 20 years from then. But it turned out that river conditions were deteriorating, as I showed you in some of the earlier slides. So things have had to be overlaid upon the 2007 guidelines, most notably the Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan, which is what those initials LBDCP stand for. And so basically, there was an additional tier added, an additional reduction. And what it did was basically wipe out the other excess CAP water that was used for water banking and Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. And because of where we've been since the start of this decade, the tier 1, if you were in tier 1, meaning that you were below 1075, basically that ag pool was wiped out. And that's why there's not the deliveries there had been in the last decade to agriculture in Central Arizona. There is some delivered to agriculture because partners like cities or industry are entering into agreements to use what is called the Groundwater Savings Program, but there's much less than there had been, considerably less. And then getting even lower, you get into the NIA pool, which affects some of the cities, Gila River Indian community. And if you look, again, I'm not going to go back to the chart, we may very soon be going into the tier 2B or into tier 3, and you're getting into those higher priority blocks of water there. But the story gets a little worse, unfortunately, which I'll show you in a minute. Do want to mention, I showed these zones, but by no means am I attempting to be comprehensive in talking about all agriculture in Arizona by looking at those areas. Even within Pinal County, if you look at a map showing the large irrigation districts in the county, you've got this purple area of the Gila River Indian community. You've got the Ak-Chin Indian community, and their priority, the priority of their water is different from the non-Indian agricultural districts that have been accepting water. There's other Indian agriculture, there's other non-Indian agriculture. So I just want to mention, I wasn't purporting to be totally comprehensive. Do want to mention just briefly for completeness that there are groundwater issues that remain and have remained in the active management areas. Some of them have been addressed with some recent policies like Ag to Urban and the alternative route to designation of assured water supply, but some of them are still not addressed, and it's been challenging having the decision makers come up with agreement on what to do and how to approach things other than through the existing AMA and irrigation non-expansion area frameworks. All right, so this is where kind of the story gets a bit worse. And I mentioned there were the 2007 guidelines. They were expected to last for 20 years, and the 20 years is up. The federal government is expected to announce its new guidelines very soon, maybe later this summer, for implementation in the start of the water year, which starts October 1, the federal water year. And so they issued a draft environmental impact statement. They looked at 5 different alternatives. There's a few more that are in this graph, but the problem for the lower basin and the concerns that have been voiced through hundreds and thousands and I don't know how many pages of written commentary to the draft DIS is that if you look at how much of a cutback there will be under these different alternatives, you see that they range from 7% to 44%, and then in the lower basin, but 0 in all of them for the upper basin. So there's been a real concern. These slides shown here are from the Arizona Reconsultation Committee. They were included by Vinitha Kartha in a presentation to the class. But there's been a consternation, to put it mildly, between the lower basin and upper basin on what to do. And there's clear concerns from the lower basin states that the federal government didn't include any options that included a reduction in by the upper basin. The upper basin states are Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico. The lower basin states are Arizona, Nevada, and California. And then these blue bars overlay what the percentage cutback. So the vertical axis is percentage cutback to the Central Arizona Project under these different alternatives. And so they range from, 32% is about the best, kind of where we've been, but up to 98%. So major concern about what some of these alternatives could mean for Central Arizona cities, tribes, basically all users of Colorado River water. And then this is, again, a chart showing the maximum policy shortage to the lower basin under each of these alternatives. So they're looking at Mexico, Nevada, California, and Arizona. And by the way, if anybody's interested in following this, there is an Arizona Reconsultation Committee, an ARC meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m., I believe it is, and those are broadcast. I don't usually watch them, but there's a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to probably try to tune in tomorrow to see, hear the latest. And then here's another graphic just showing available Arizona supply after the maximum policy shortage. And so again, it's not looking good. And it says the Arizona supply could be significantly less than illustrated when considering dead pool shortages. So, you can look at things mathematically and what the models, but if water levels get so low that the water can't pass downstream from Glen Canyon Dam to the lower basin into the Colorado River and then into Lake Mead, or the levels of Lake Mead get so low that you can't push the water down, deliver the water downstream, we've got problems for everybody. All right. So what is the summary of the impacts to agriculture from water supply challenges? Central Arizona farmers are having to adjust to less Colorado River water availability. How are they adjusting? Maybe some changes in crops, land fallowing in a major way, a return to groundwater, but it's not so easy to turn pumps on after you haven't been using pumps for a long time, where you built a system that was really dependent on surface water flows to deliver water to the ag lands. There is ag land being held for future development, but the pace of development is uncertain. There's interest in farmlands for solar development, but some don't want to do that. There's also questions about, how much investment could one put into alternative irrigation methods when farmers may not own their lands. They may be leasing them, and the leases could end before a reasonable time for payback. Yuma area agriculture is expected to continue with its focus on leafy green vegetables. Farming, I believe, is expected to continue on tribal lands. There is groundwater management changes that are occurring. They've occurred already. There may be some others, but there are policy disagreements on the details. And then there are opportunities to implement more efficient irrigation practices. But of course, we have to remember that water cycle, that flood irrigation, not all of that water is used for consumptively, and it may either find its way into surface tailwaters or into the recharge of aquifers. So we've got issues, lots of impacts. This is just a quick overview. And again, it goes back to innovation and collaboration leading to adaptation. I mean, there's a lot of adaptation already going on, and there will be more. All right, so just innovation, Arizona is no stranger to innovation. We're actually got a good record of it when it comes to water management, but we can't rest on our laurels. We've got new problems, and we've got to figure out how to address them and continue to thrive and have a vital economy and agricultural sector. So we've got problems. We also have some solutions, not always easy to implement for different reasons, not always agreement on what should be. But this is a list that I've been using for some time. I'm not going to read the whole list to you. You can take a look at it while I'm talking. But, conservation's there at the top. It's generally agreed that we can't conserve our way out of the issues. That's been agreed upon for some time. Is there more opportunity for conservation? I believe there is, but that alone is not going to be the solution. And then, issues of greater efficiency. A big issue when it comes to the agricultural sector is efficiency of water use has not always translated into reduced water use. And so if there are programs to encourage efficiency, there is a need to monitor those water savings, often quantify them so that they may be translated into actually less water used by the farming community. And things that we've done, water storage, banking, moving water, marketing, etc. Policy changes are important to this, creative partnerships and dollars that can incentivize some of these changes. So the need for investment, innovation rather, has never been greater. Sharing the burden of reduced Colorado River flows. We've been trying to do that and have been doing that in Arizona for about a decade now, but things have gotten to the point where it's stressed. There's not that much in the way of degrees of freedom, but there are still innovative proposals being put out there. The water irrigation efficiency program that's been carried out by Arizona Cooperative Extension is a program that's tried to incentivize a use of irrigation efficiency changes and technologies, with there being careful monitoring of the results, and people at the University of Arizona are closely involved in that. Innovation in government institutions is one of the things that's happened, particularly the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority that was reconfigured at the end of Governor Ducey's term, and they're working on long-term water augmentation. And again, policies. It's hard to give a presentation about water these days and not mention data centers and as large water users or potentially large water users. And there's a lot of policy interest in what to do about that, a little bit beyond the scope of today's presentation. But back to the guidelines for sharing the Colorado River water. And the shortage, those must be adopted soon. We're all at risk. All Colorado River water users in Arizona are likely to be impacted. And what will the federal government decision be? We don't know. And things are changing very rapidly. Just on May 1st at 4:52 p.m. Pacific time, and I was told that there was a deadline that day, the lower basin, or they call themselves the lower division states, put in a proposal, a new proposal, not one of them that's been analyzed thus far, for how to share this shortage. And I'm sure that's going to form a major part of tomorrow's discussion by the Arizona Reconsultation Committee. If the upper basin and lower basin states cannot come to some agreement, it is very likely, it may happen anyway, that we will end up in court. And that could take a very long time, and the courts don't create water. So just my final last couple of slides, I just want to mention that the University of Arizona will continue to be engaged. I've already mentioned the water efficiency irrigation program. And then we've looked at, through a university commission report about the future of food and production in agriculture in a drying climate. We have some current strategic initiatives related to the University of Arizona's focus on environmental systems, arid lands, agriculture, and water. And so there have been some sub-initiatives, and it's all in motion right now. And so we're looking for some additional opportunity to focus on those areas. We already have the Yuma Center for Excellence in Desert Agriculture. That's an agricultural industry partnership with the U of A. So there's lots and lots of stuff going on. Arizona researchers have been active in agrivoltaics, and I've been connected to this effort that includes agrivoltaic installation in Kenya and connecting to Israel. But just finally, I want to mention, when I gave that little overview at the beginning, I mentioned, I wanted to, a lot of my work relates to helping people understand, characterize what is the situation, what are the challenges, what are the potential solutions, and then the role of process and people. That is really key to figuring out our pathway or pathways forward. And so I also have written and spoken about process factors for success. And this particular list on the left was based on experience working with Mexico on the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program, and also Colorado River issues. Things like trust, very, very important. Persistence and patience at the same time, getting to know your partners, eating with them, leadership, and then additional factors like transparency. These are very important, and often absence of these can be a key obstacle to moving forward. Not engineering, not even money in certain cases, but it's the process and people factors. So I think I'm just about perfectly on time for the 45 minutes. I know I've spoken quickly, but I'm happy to answer questions. I'm going to leave this up for a minute. if anybody wants to take a screenshot. Again, I invite you, contact me by email, subscribe to the Weekly Wave, and check out the WRRC homepage. So with that, I will stop sharing, and I am happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for the wonderful presentation and the valuable insights. So we have some time for the question and answer. So if you have any question, please raise your hand or post it in the chat box.
Yeah, Avik, do you want to, if there are any, read any questions, or do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the people. If I have one question, you have already answered one of that, but I have one question. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes if anyone wants to go first. That should be fine.
Well, I'm looking at the names in here, and I know some of them, so I hope if anybody has some corrections, offer those. I tried to be as accurate as I could be in the 45 minutes I have.
Okay, so I have one question, Sharon. So, as you mentioned that given the prolonged multi-decade drought conditions across the Colorado River Basin, so what do you think about the what extent could it be several consecutive winters of above average snowpack and the runoff, as you mentioned, like 2023 we had? So will it be like significantly contribute to a meaningful recovery of the reservoir storage levels? And if that is possible, so what are the timelines?
Well, that's a really good question that I'm afraid I don't have a good definitive answer for. Um,
Okay.
I like to contrast the Colorado River system with the Salt River Project system, the Salt and Verde
Hmm.
rivers. And so um, the Salt and Verde system, that that has the potential to recover quickly from a bad year or two. You could have a really
Okay.
good winter of
Yeah.
precipitation and runoff, and you can bounce back quickly. I don't know if there's been. I'm sure somebody has an answer to the question of how many 2023 winters would it take to
Yeah.
get us up to a certain,
Like,
recovery.
yeah.
It will take a while. It will take a
Yeah.
while. But I don't have the answer to that. And I don't know. Somebody must, but unfortunately, I don't have it. It would be great to have, several winters in a row of good conditions. Rather than what seems to happen is we have multiple years of bad conditions and
Hmm.
then one year good. Like 2011 was kind of good. 2016, I think, or actually it was 18 or 19, was right at the time, and I was on the
Right.
CDA board then when we were negotiating DCP. And well, and even if you go, like we had a good winter. And so we, people call it a band-aid. We have a good winter,
Hmm.
and like everybody says, okay, let's take advantage of it. We don't have to feel the pain yet. But now we seem to be feeling a lot of pain. And okay, somebody might say, hey, look, they got us so worried, and 2027 is a
Yeah.
great winter. We would love that. But we have to be prepared for the bad times. And so the
Right.
saying of hope for the best, pray for the best, be prepared for the worst,
Hmm.
that's what we have to do. And the situation just keeps getting worse. And that's what's so hard now, that we're worried about the ability to generate hydropower. We've learned that Glen Canyon Dam, it's not so easy to deliver water downstream once the levels get lower. And
Right.
even with like Mead and the hydropower at Hoover Dam, um, that's at risk too. So
Yeah.
it's, it gets, sometimes it may sound pretty simple, and most of the people in the audience, I see a lot of water professionals and professors, people I know from academia, but I keep saying it's like your savings. You've had the surface water storage, it's your
Hmm.
savings. You've pulled out of it. You realize that it's not going to last you forever, and it's getting painful, and you want to
Yeah.
deposit stuff back in, and you lose your job. And so you have no inflow. Well, Mother Nature's not providing us the the income that we'd hope for,
Hmm.
and we just have to deal with that reality. And it's very serious. I mean, we don't have much of a cushion. Where as at the turn of the century in the early 2000s, we were almost at full storage in around 1999, 2000. We had a bad year in 2002 and some years after that,
Yeah.
but we had all that savings. So
Hmm.
I don't know the answer. It's a long-winded way of saying
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to your question, but somebody must.
It's, yeah, I understand. Yeah. So I have a couple of more questions in the chat box before we moving on to the questions. So I'll just launch the survey. Please post your feedback. And you have one question from Harold. Do you have any opinion on the forecasted super El Nino for this fall?
Yeah, I've been reading about that, and it's a forecast. Forecasts aren't always accurate. And so, I guess some of what I've read, which is, really just what everybody else reads in the general news, is that
Hmm.
it could be debilitating in terms of flooding and so forth. And it would be nice not to go from one extreme to the other and not have, damaging flooding from the super El Nino. Um, so all I could say is um, it would be good to have some precipitation, but for the
Hmm.
Colorado River system, often down in Tucson, where I live, when we get a good monsoon in the summer, people say, okay, what is it? The TV stations, what does it mean for recharge? They come to me, I usually send them to hydrologists. But with relying on Colorado River water and the Central Arizona Project for a lot of our water supply, the rain we get is not as important to the snowpack is not as important to the snowpack and snow melt. So I guess that's all I can say, maybe is an uninformed opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sharon. So I have another question from Mike. So, by example, the city of Phoenix has a contract with TSMC to provide water, but not necessarily a contract with its populace. So, how will the priorities be defined?
Yeah, and that's a great question. There A lot of the communities up in the Phoenix Valley, I think starting with Phoenix might have been the first one, have adopted some ordinances relating to large users, particularly ge generated by
Hmm.
data centers. Of course, TSMC is a manufacturing facility for chips. Um, so when you say a contract with to provide water, but not necessarily a contract with its population, that's where, I work a lot. I try to get people interested in water. I don't, one of the things is, what can I do as an individual? And the answer I'll often give is, don't take water for granted, know where it comes from. And I don't mean the tap, and not everybody has a tap. And so, city officials are elected by the people, and they are um, acting in a way that is responsive to their electorate. And I think it's a matter of having an informed electorate and sharing information. On that one of the last slides, I put transparency. And down here in Tucson, there was a lot of concern, and it still continues with the
Hmm.
Project Blue. And so much of that was generated by non-disclosure agreements and lack of information. And so transparency and sharing information is, those are both very, very important.
Thank you, Sharon. We have another question from Antonio. Do you know if the pecan farm along the I-10 by Eloy died because of the water cuts from the Tier 1 shortage?
You know, I that issue of the pecan farm
I have the
that
answer for that.
yes, go
Please,
ahead
Sharon,
because
you
I
go
know
ahead.
that came up among some extension
Yeah.
faculty. Please, Avi,
So,
answer that.
Antonio, so the if you drive from Phoenix to Tucson, you will see on the east side of the I-10, on your left-hand side, the trees are cut down because the trees were too old and was not productive in comparing to the input. So the grower was running in a loss. But if you see on the right-hand side, the farm is fine because the trees are moderately younger and very productive. So it's nothing related to water shortage. So they just want to maximize the inputs for the better trees rather than the older trees. So it's not related to water cuts.
Yeah, could I just point out something I read
Yeah.
really interesting over the weekend, I think it was, is that I read how Del Monte in California is closing its
Mhm.
peach processing plant, and they are taking down something like 400,000 trees, peach trees, because they don't have the opportunity to process those peaches anymore. The point being, there's maybe different reasons for seeing trees being taken down and not, the
Yeah.
production stopping. But thank you, Avik, for answering that question.
Yeah, no problem. We have another question from Jennifer. How much do you think augmented water, like new desalination plants or etc., can help supplement our current water deficits? Without augmented water, what, in your opinion, is the most effective conservation option in the state can implement?
Well, Jennifer, I think you, of course, have it at the end, the answer. It is going to
Yeah.
take more than one solution. Um, and water augmentation can be interpreted by different people different ways. So for some, water augmentation means bringing in water from another area, such as doing some desalination in Mexico or California and doing an exchange or piping the water in. It could be
Mhm.
desalinating brackish groundwater and having non-usable groundwater become more usable. It can be advanced water purification. Again, sometimes these are water sources that would be used in different ways or maybe not used. And I think it's going to be kind of all of the above. And I personally believe, I use the term adaptation. I think we're going to see reductions in demand also going on at the same time. And whether it's at the municipal level, as people become more in tune with the water shortages, or there's just drought plans. Again,
Yeah.
most of this focused on agriculture, but at the city level, there are drought plans, and maybe they become more stringent and more required. And so I think it is going to take all of the above because, and some of these are going to have to be strategies to get us through because some of these larger long-term augmentation projects, they are long-term, they're expensive, and we've got to make some adjustments now. So it's going to be many of the above.
Okay. Okay, we have one question from Ron Rayner. What is the priority level of the Welton Mohawk Irrigation District?
Oh, Ron Rayner, you're going to ask me a question that stumps me because there is a difference in the irrigation district, their water holdings, Ron. I know you know that over in Yuma. And I don't I don't know um I don't know the answer to that. But we could find out, right? We could call Elston Gruba and find that out. Um
Good.
what
Okay, thank you,
Ron,
Ron.
since you unmuted yourself, you asked it with a question in mind. I'm curious what you're thinking that led you to ask that question.
Well, if you know the Welton Mohawk District, there is some water under parts of it as groundwater, but it's basically drainage water. very high salinity. So there are no groundwater wells to serve delivery at all in that whole basin. And I was just curious just where they fell in the hierarchy, because it's not clear. I mean, it's been quite a while, but it is a contractual agency like the Central Arizona Project. And I know they have a higher priority, but when you look at it compared to the others in the area, I actually think they're next. If the CAP goes down to their lowest
Yeah.
levels, only the highest levels of the Indian water might be the ones delivered that would be ahead of Welton Mohawk. I'm just curious at what point some of those growers I know are anxious, and there's no projections, I think, being given to them about what can happen.
Yeah, and the other thing there too, and a couple of years ago, I mean, one of the nice things about my classes, I bring in, like I showed slides from Brenda Berman and Benita Cartha. A couple of years ago, Megan Scott, who's an attorney from the Yuma area, gave a presentation and had a really nice slide showing the different Yuma users and the priorities, which ones were present perfected rights and so forth. So I can go back and see if I can find that. But the point you're making is even in the Yuma area where I gave the broad brush comment that they have high priority rights, they're not all the same, right? And
That's right.
when I talked about crit, someone who was looking at my words astutely, I said very high priority rights.
Yeah.
So even in Yuma, there are differences for sure. I
Yeah.
just don't know the answer. There's certainly not P4, I don't believe, though. So,
Well,
and
one
maybe
of
there
the
is this quantified too. Again, there's a lot of complexities, and I learn every time I see a presentation about Yuma. But Yuma County Water Users Association, they don't have, their right is not quantified. They can use as much river water as they need for their purposes, but they're actually using less than they used 30 years ago or so. So
yes.
interesting dynamics with the water situation, certainly in the Yuma area.
One of the interesting things that's come up just recently is the discovery of a pot of money somewhere left over from the Inflation Reduction Act. And they believe that they may be able to buy some water away from those districts, Imperial Valley and in Yuma as well. And Imperial Valley, they were using the deficit irrigation program, and apparently they ran out of money for that, so they were only going to do a reduced program for this year. And that was an innovative program where they agreed to pay growers to fallow their land just in the late summer so that alfalfa can go dry without killing it, Bermuda grass, Sudan grass. So those were all agreed to. They were voluntary, and you could not uh, produce those. And for a month and a half or so, they would pay you for the water that you did not use. And it was an important aspect, and they saved a lot of water in Imperial Valley doing that.
Yeah, and one of the things that about the water, realizing that we have a number of listeners who are not from the Tucson area and may not have seen, but Tony Davis with the Arizona Daily Star wrote an article about a week ago, or maybe even less, that there was mention of maybe $450 million being available to
Yes,
use to help incentivize. I use the word
yes,
incentivize, in my presentation behaviors. But one of the things that I think we've seen and heard is the word durable has come up a lot. The Bureau of Reclamation has talked about since 2022 or so durable changes to the operating, guidelines and system, things that will carry forward over time. And some of these activities, actions to pay, like you said, to reduce water use in a period of time, it's for a period of time, and then it if the funds end, things go back to where they were. Whereas if you deal more with irrigation practices and change some of that, where you may use less water, yes, you have to recognize there may be less, infiltration if you stop flood irrigating. Those can be more durable or lasting over time. So I think there's a lot of people interested in saying, what can we do that will carry us, these investments can carry us forward. And that goes back to Jennifer Wendell's question about, augmenting through desalination plants and so forth. If you do something with the ocean will be there more likely than the Colorado River is going to bounce back with, strong flows. So it is a system and it is complicated, and that's why we call the problem a wicked water problem, because it's going to take a lot to figure out how to mitigate the issues.
Yes.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Sharon. So we have one more question. So Antonio is claiming that the Yuma people doesn't use all the allocated water. Is that true?
So
I'm not claiming that. I'm hearing that from
as I just indicated, some of the water rights in Yuma are not quantified. And so when I mentioned Yuma County Water Users Association, which by the way is a private association of users, they're not actually a governmental district. They are, I understand at least some users in the Yuma area are using less water than they did back in the 1980s, when they were basically growing cotton, alfalfa, maybe other, forage crops before they made the large scale move to the leafy green vegetables. And so I don't know if it's that they don't use all of the water that's allocated, or they don't use all the water that's available to them to use. That may in fact be true, but that doesn't necessarily translate into water that somebody else can use because of where they are in the system. And even there's so many complications. So I think even what you may have heard, Antonio, I guess I would ask, so what is the implication from a policy perspective? Nobody wants to give up their rights. If I haven't seen people wanting to give up their rights. From hearing from the Yuma growers, and the last thing I would ever want to do is speak on their behalf, so nobody should interpret anything I say as speaking on behalf, is that I've heard them say, and I've understood them say that they're willing to consider options for compensation, but not things that impact long-term water rights. So there's a difference between engaging in something that's voluntary, it could even be multi-year, but doesn't give up a water right. And I think that's critical to any holder of water rights not wanting to give them up. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, Antonio, but some of these Yuma questions are best asked of Yuma people.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Okay, any more questions? So I think Harold asked that this year gonna be a super El Nino year. So does it mean like an active monsoon season for Arizona? So normally I would say for El Nino years, we get above average rainfall in Arizona, but some years are very uncertain due to the uncertainties in the hurricanes in the Pacific Ocean. It depends on how much moisture we are getting from there. So it's a little bit uncertain, but as of the current situation, I have seen a lot of National Weather Service and CPC, they are claiming it's gonna be a kind of wet monsoon season for Arizona. So fingers crossed, and let's see.
Yeah, and I'll share one other thing, and it's not so much
Yeah,
the summer, like late
yeah,
fall, summer, but one of the things I remembered learning, seeing when I was on the CAP board was a slide that showed average annual flows of the Colorado River connected
yeah.
to El Nino, La Nina, and neither. And basically the dots were all over the place, meaning
Right.
that an El Nino winter did not necessarily result in
Yeah.
significantly higher flows of the
Right.
river. And that was really striking to me as someone who's
Mhm.
not a climatologist and all that. But even when you might have a season that's cold, an El Nino winter, it might not always translate into more
Right.
river
Yeah.
flows. So
Mhm. Right.
well, anyway,
Yeah.
thank you for hosting me, Avik, and
Yeah,
thank
no
you for
problem.
everybody.
And thank you so much, Sharon, for your time and valuable insights. And thank you all the people for being here today. And thank you for your responses and feedback. So I have recorded the whole presentation. So if you need, please reach out to me. I will share the presentation to you. Thank you so much. You have a very good rest of your day all. Thank you, everyone.